Please be seated. The Royal Commission will now resume.
Mr. Zarifa.
To a new hearing, a hearing in relation to the building that was at 617 to 625 Colombo Street, which was on the corner of Tuam and Colombo Streets.
Yes.
This building was a series of two-storied unreinforced masonry buildings on the northwest corner of Tuam and Colombo Streets. And they appear to have been constructed as a single building which was connected to the buildings to the north, which were at 627 and 629 Colombo, sharing a party wall. It appears that the building had previously been a heritage building and not entirely clear of the status as at 22 February, but it appears it may have been lifted prior to that. Following the September earthquake, all of the tenancies in the building were green placarded. On the 7th of September, Level 2 rapid assessments were completed by structural engineers Becker on behalf of the owners, and the green placards maintained. The owners of the building commissioned Becker to complete an independent assessment of the building, and the building was re-inspected on the 10th and the 15th of September, and a report supplied dated 10 December 2010. That report identified that the building, or calculated that the building was earthquake prone and some 11% of new building standard, but it concluded that the building did not pose an immediate risk to the occupants. Various repairs and further investigations were recommended. It would appear that no repair work was carried out on the building prior to the 22nd of February earthquake. In the 22 February earthquake, the building at 625 Colombo Street and the attached buildings to the north of that building suffered collapses of their street frontages on Colombo Street. Jennifer Donaldson was a pedestrian on Colombo Street at the time of the earthquake. Her body was found by police under rubble outside 625 Colombo Street. Proposed witnesses are Peter Smith, structural engineer, Mr McCarthy from the Christchurch City Council, David Ellers, who is a lawyer in Dunedin, who's one of the owners of the building, and that's set up for a video link, I think at 3:45 this afternoon, so with the Commission's leave we'll work around that.
Yes.
And then from Becker, Jonathan Barnett and Mark Humphrey. Mark Humphrey carried out the inspections that I've just spoken of in late 2010, but under the supervision of Mr Barnett, and it's proposed that Mr Barnett and Mr Humphrey will sit at the table, and Mr Barnett will speak to the evidence, and if required Mr Humphrey can answer any particular questions.
Yes.
And the only other information that's listed there is police information showing the location of Mrs Donaldson's body. That's not intended to go into that unless needed. I've set out as council what I foresee as likely issues, and that's application of the council's earthquake prone policy to the building, which is, as I said, applies to all of these buildings. Secondly, the structural assessment of the building after the 4th of September earthquake, and in particular the Becker assessment and the conclusion that I've referred to, that the building was 11% of new building standard but did not pose an immediate risk to the occupants.
Yes, all right. So can I just note other appearances, Mr Zarifa? We have Mr Elliott, as usual, and Mr Lang.
Stay.
Thank you.
There's the chronology, Your Honour. I don't intend to go through that. It's relatively brief, and I'll move straight to the first witness, which is Mr Smith.
Yes, thank you. Council or anybody else is welcome to follow Mr. Smith's lead and take off their jacket.
Thank you, sir.
Good idea.
Mr. Smith, you had prepared a report dated November 2011 on the building that was at 617625 Colombo Street.
Correct.
And if I can just take you through the main points of your report. As you've heard me indicate, it was a two-storey unreinforced masonry building on a corner site.
Correct.
And it appears to have had few alterations other than some strengthening work carried out in 1994 and then a stage 2 in 2000.
Correct.
And I'll get you to come to that in a moment. I think you've looked at the seismic strengthening that was undertaken in those years. Am I right, by reference to the City Council records and to references in a report from Becca?
Correct.
And middle of page 3, I think you briefly summarise that structural strengthening.
Correct.
That middle paragraph. Stage 1, strengthening provided lateral load resistance to 0.075 G.
That's our understanding, yes.
And your interpretation of the correspondence is that on completion of the stage 2 strengthening, the building would achieve a lateral load resistance of 0.14 G.
Correct.
And as we've said, that stage 2 appears to have been undertaken in September 2000.
Correct.
And of course, given the change in regulations that post-dated that strengthening, that could well mean that the building was still earthquake prone at the time of the September earthquake, correct?
Correct.
Just want to turn to the structural failure, and perhaps the easiest thing is to get you to read the paragraphs that appear under structural failure and then under the issues arising from the review to the end of your report.
Structural failure. The failure of the Colombo Street facade to the buildings at the site 623 to 629 Colombo Street appears to have been an outward rotation of the first floor facades and parapet about the first floor supports.
Mr. Smith, this is a sweet spot. It's about just a couple of millimetres away from where you were. You get voice is very explosive if it's too close, and too soft if it's too far away. So it's very difficult to win, but you weren't winning.
The code lateral load coefficient, is that right? For a facade to an elastic responding structure in Christchurch at the time of the earthquake sequence was 0.86 G. The analysis of the unreinforced masonry construction is not covered in the New Zealand Building Code. The industry uses the New Zealand Society for Earthquake Engineering Guidelines, Assessment and Improvement of the Structural Performance of Buildings in Earthquakes, 2000, and Assessment and Improvement of Unreinforced Masonry Buildings for Earthquake Resistance, 2011. Calculations using these documents indicate that a 225 thick unreinforced masonry wall spanning 3 metres from the first floor level to roof level in an unreinforced masonry building, assuming no edge restraint, would meet code requirement. Based on GNS science records of measurement of accelerations in the Christchurch CBD during the 22nd of February 2011 earthquake, the buildings were likely to have been subjected to a ground acceleration of 0.9 G. This level of ground acceleration equates to 1.25 G acceleration at first floor level. The analysis assumes no vertical acceleration occurs when the wall is subjected to the horizontal acceleration. Clearly the walls of St Asaph Street and Colombo Street have significant penetrations which affect both the weight and strength of the facade. The above figures demonstrate that the facades may not have survived the Canterbury earthquake series had the facades been secured at roof level by fixings designed for the then full code requirements.
Just pause there. I thought when reading it, and I still think, that the last two sentences that you've just read must have strayed into this report from another one, because correct me if I'm wrong, but we're a couple of blocks north of St Asaph Street here, aren't we?
It's Churham Street.
Sorry, yes, you're right, correct. It is.
But just be careful here, Mr. Smith. Are you saying that if we change St Asaph Street
to
Churham Street, that
yes, correct.
Those comments would be correct?
Yes.
All right.
Carry on, please.
The facades, which were restrained to a lateral load coefficient as low as 0.1 G, were unlikely to remain stable in the severe shaking that occurred during the 22nd of February 2011 earthquake, although the level of securing did prevent failure of the facades to the buildings 143 Churham Street and 623 to 625 Colombo Street. Issues arising from review. Upgrading of unreinforced masonry buildings. The front facades of the buildings 623 to 629 Colombo Street collapsed into Colombo Street as a result of the 22nd of February 2011 earthquake. The roof partially collapsed and the brick party walls and internal walls were damaged. It is significant that the end building and a series of interconnected unreinforced masonry buildings of similar height at 593 601A 603 Colombo Street lost their street facades and were significantly damaged in the 22nd of February 2011 earthquake, while the street facades to the strengthened building 617 to 621 Colombo Street were retained, presumably as a result of the strengthening work undertaken on the building. The reason for the failure of the strengthened facades to the buildings at 623 to 629 Colombo Street is unknown, but was not unexpected given the low level of seismic strengthening and the severity of shaking during the 22nd of February 2011 earthquake. The retention of facades to the buildings 617 to 621 Colombo Street demonstrate the benefits of strengthening to as low as 20% of current code requirements, while the failure of the street facades to the building 623 to 629 Colombo Street highlights that strengthening of the facades of unreinforced masonry buildings to such a low level is unreliable in a severe earthquake. This level of strengthening may, however, save lives in a moderate earthquake.
Right, so is that final paragraph a comment on low-level strengthening and the problems that can flow from it, and also a comment on the high level of shaking from the February earthquake?
Yes, most earthquake strengthening that was done, certainly before 2000, was intended to provide resistance in a moderate earthquake. More recent levels of strengthening have been raised, but at that time that was the objective, and I guess the 4th of September earthquake was the better test. The severity of the 22nd of February was a very severe earthquake.
Right, and just going back to the paragraph that His Honour picked you up on,
yep.
By the reference to St Asaph Street, are you saying that the penetrations from the windows and openings affected the strength of the facade?
Yes, they do.
Right, and again, a similar comment to the one in the report from yesterday, that the acceleration figures that you gave demonstrate that the facades may not have survived. So you're talking about the facades to 623 to 629, Colombo Street, may not have survived even if they had been securely fixed.
Yes, it's talking about facades generally, I think. And there are a lot of factors come into whether a facade will withstand an earthquake. One is the directionality of the earthquake, the other one's the intensity of shaking, and there are other factors in terms of the period of vibration, etc. But given that this building had been strengthened to quite a relatively low level of strength, it was surprising in some respects that some of those facades did withstand that.
Okay. And perhaps you can just take us to some photographs to show us what you're talking about with the failure. Perhaps, firstly, 617.0002E.1. Now that's clearly after the 22nd of February because rubble's been cleared up.
Yes, it's also after the USAR team have been through to remove the imminent danger.
Okay, so perhaps the only thing we can get from that is a comment on the facade on the is it 617, the corner building?
Yes, that, as you can see, is still in position and has been effectively secured for that shaking.
So that's 617 we're looking at. Is it the satay noodles?
Yes, correct.
That's number 617.
And the adjoining, I think the adjoining property, which doesn't really have a sign, is 621. But part of the veranda is gone.
Okay, perhaps another photo might be clearer. 0007.15. Okay, now that's, I'm not sure exactly when that was taken, but seems to be closer in time to the earthquake.
Yes, I think so, yes.
And I think I'm correct in saying that the 625 is to the left of the building that has the sign Sucklings?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And so the facade of that building and the buildings to the right of it, as you've said, were collapsed in the earthquake?
Correct.
And as we've seen and can see in that photo, the 617 facade was not?
That's correct. 621 also.